Today's story will reveal to you how everyday events can turn into a real nightmare for some people. Excessive gullibility is rarely a positive trait. It prevents one from realistically assessing risks and can lead to dire consequences. This is exactly what happened to the protagonist of our story, who paid too high a price for her carelessness. Clare Bernall was born on July 25, 1983 in the picturesque town of Tunbridge Wells, Kent, England. It's a small scenic locality, located just a few hours' drive from the British capital. So Clare, like her mother, enjoyed visiting here from time to go shopping. Usually such outings took place on weekends and were combined with family leisure. Patricia, the heroine's mother, worked as a cook. Her father, Martin, was engaged in the financial sector, headed an organization and ran his own business. The family lived quite affluently. Clare had two brothers, James and Philip. She was the middle child in the family. The girl was distinguished by a gentle, calm disposition. She was the glue that smoothed out sharp edges and held the family together. However, this did not save her parents' marriage, which over time began to fall apart at the seams. The couple divorced when their daughter was still in primary school. Despite the fact that her parents moved to live separately, Clare managed to maintain close relationships with both of them. From a young age, Clare was a creative and artistic soul, a very positive, kind, trusting and well-mannered girl. At the age of 12, she became seriously passionate about the beauty industry. This resulted in active experiments with makeup. It's not surprising that as soon as the opportunity to get a job appeared, she became an employee of a local cosmetics store. In fact, the girl had some complexes about her appearance, so she used makeup to hide what she considered flaws. By the age of 18, she became more confident in herself and achieved considerable success in makeup artistry. Clare was self-taught, but developed her own style and wonderfully embodied various looks on herself and her friends when experimenting with cosmetics. Clare enrolled in West Kent College in Tunbridge, where she began to master beauty art. At the same time, she learned the basics of running a business by assisting her father. In 2001, the girl received her diploma. By that time, she already had clear plans for the future. Her dream was to do professional stage makeup and work on film sets and in theaters. In 2003, Clare decided to change jobs to something more interesting. She began sending out resumes to major cosmetic stores, eager to get a manager position in order to gain more experience in her dream field. These were independent initiatives. The girls simply collected the contacts of her favorite stores and reached out to their management. In this way, she was invited for an interview in the La Prairie brand department of Harvey Nichols in the prestigious London borough of Knightsbridge. It was a very famous luxury skincare cosmetics brand, one of the best in the British capital. Getting a job there became a dream come true for our heroine. She persuaded a friend to go with her to this interview. The girl effortlessly managed to get the coveted position. Everything went smoothly. The successful interview radically changed her life. At the age of 21, she moved closer to London and started working. For the first half of the day, Clare, along with her colleagues, was busy with work, and then spent time with friends. Here she became especially close with two young co-workers, Susan and Natalie. The three girls began renting an apartment together to split the rent. Their dwelling was located about 40 minutes' drive from work. However, this drawback was compensated by the fact that the town was similar to Clare's hometown. So the girl felt truly comfortable here. Clare did not engage in long-term relationships, but from time to time she met nice guys and dated them. Usually these romances did not go beyond light flirting. She was very picky in choosing a permanent partner. In 2004, she took a liking to Michael Pech, a new security guard at Harvey Nichols where she worked. He was a former serviceman originally from Slovakia. After working at the American Embassy in Bratislava in 2003, he moved to London on a student visa. While Michael was working in the British capital, Slovakia joined the EU. From then on, the young man did not need to worry about documents. He gained freedom of movement and could stay in the UK indefinitely. Michael got a job as a security guard at Harvey Nichols in 2004, where he met Clare. At first they communicated as friends, but at the end of January 2005, the guy began to take the initiative and they started dating. At that time, he was divorcing his wife who lived in Slovakia. Clare decided to try to build a romantic relationship, although she had doubts. She told her mother that she had a boyfriend. Michael was 8 years older, so the girl was not sure if she wanted to tie her life to such a mature man, despite the fact that they got along well. However, 30-year-old Michael had different views on life. He seemed seriously aimed at starting a family with the girl. Clare hesitated and was not yet eager for anything serious. But the security guard turned out to be so persistent that he pressured her. Michael became obsessed with Clare right after their first date. He even confessed his love to her. The girl was shocked by such a rapid development of events and did not know how to respond. Within 3 weeks, Clare became uncomfortable with how jealous Michael was and how he totally controlled her. Although they only went on 3 dates. Michael wanted her to spend time only with him, stop communicating with friends and even with family. Clare made every effort to get rid of the intrusive boyfriend. She decided to break off the relationship when Michael returned to London from Slovakia and demanded that the girl meet him at the airport. Clare met him when they arrived at her place. Michael wanted to stay the night, but the girl was against it. He was not going to leave, so a short argument broke out between them. Eventually Michael did leave, but Clare's rejection was a real blow to him. The man began to wait near the girl's house and called her 20 times, but she did not answer. Clare shouted to him through the window to leave her alone, but Michael did not leave for about 2 hours. One of the heroine's neighbors asked him to get out, but he rudely replied and said that she should mind her own business. Finally, the man left. The next day, Michael showed up at Clare's apartment again with a bouquet of flowers. He waited for her, but the girl did not want to see him. She was worried that she would now constantly run into him at work, which turned out to be true. Clare tried to avoid any contact with Michael, and he, in turn, took every opportunity to be near her and see her as often as possible. The man followed her around the store. She caught his intent gaze time after time. He decided to act more decisively and several times approached the girl with a request to resume the relationship. Michael assured that he loved her and knew about the reciprocity of her feelings. Clare only shook her head in denial. Then the man began to ask her colleagues to persuade the girl to talk to him. This only angered Clare. She insisted that he leave her alone, but the heroine's refusal only made the situation worse. Once, after the end of the work shift, when Clare was leaving the store, the man grabbed her hand and declared that he loved her. The girl was silent. Michael began to shout about his love louder and louder, attracting the attention of everyone around. Clare replied that she did not love him, and walked away. When meeting with her mother, the heroine showed a photo of this man. Patricia immediately noticed something strange in his eyes. The woman was worried that this was not the best choice for her daughter. But Clare reassured her mother that she had already broken up with Michael. She had almost no experience communicating with men, so she decided to wait before making a choice. The mother sighed with relief, thinking that this strange admirer had left her alone. In early July 2005, Clare, along with Susan and Natalie, tired of Michael's obsession, moved to a new apartment in Dulwich, much closer to work. The girl changed her phone number. After her 22nd birthday, the heroine went with her mother to Italy for a few days. And soon Clare met and started a romance with a new boyfriend. She was delighted and told her close friends that she had finally met the guy of her dreams. It would seem that everything had worked out and nothing foreshadowed a tragic turn of events. On Tuesday, September 13, 2005, 22-year-old Clare agreed to swap shifts with one of her colleagues. Around 7:50 p.m., most of the visitors had already left, the working day was coming to an end, there were only 10 minutes left until the store closed. Claire cordially said goodbye to some of the employees who were already leaving. Others were putting things in order at their places. The heroine stood behind the administrator's counter. She needed to linger a bit to close everything before leaving. She and her colleague Victoria exchanged smiles. But suddenly, the happy faces turned anxious. Something incomprehensible was happening in the store. There was noise, people were running back and forth. Victoria heard screams, which were drowned out only by the sounds of gunshots. The situation got out of control. Store visitors ran out into the street in a panic. No one could understand what was happening. Within a few minutes, police officers from the local precinct were rushing to a call in West London. When the officers arrived at the scene, they were met with utter chaos. Some witnesses claimed that after the shooting, 2 people were probably killed. Law enforcement officers carefully made their way along the street, keeping their weapons at the ready, and found themselves in the Harvey Nichols shopping center. Here, on the floor near the administrator's counter, lay a bleeding girl. Her face was disfigured by several bullets, a pool of blood was spreading around her body. Nearby was a man, also with no signs of life. Judging by the pose and the gun in his hand, he had taken his own life. As it turned out, the deceased was Michael Pech, a former security guard of the store. He was quickly identified, but it was more difficult to establish the identity of the girl due to the extent of damage to her head and face. As for Michael, at first it remained unclear how he got the weapon and why he killed the girl. He fired point-blank at her face, so the victim was badly mutilated. But colleagues recognized her as Clare Bernall. Even without a forensic examination, it was obvious that Clare had been shot 4 times. The first bullet hit her in the back from behind, the rest were fired by the attacker into her face. Criminalists set about collecting evidence and examining the crime scene, simultaneously interviewing numerous witnesses. The head of the store's security service approached the officers and offered to look through files from his computer. According to the man, he had been closely monitoring Michael after a series of incidents in which he was involved. These files contained alarming information about Pech, but the police did not want to jump to conclusions, because they had to conduct their own investigation first. The work of the investigators immediately encountered obstacles. The administration of the shopping center insisted on opening the next morning, because every minute of downtime was costing them round sums. Law enforcement officers refused, stating that first it was necessary to thoroughly investigate everything, collect evidence, carry out a reconstruction, at the very least, find all the bullets and shells fired from Michael's weapon. 6 cartridges were missing in the store, but no matter how hard they searched, the police could not find the 6th bullet. The deceased's colleague suggested that the former security guard might have known Claire's work schedule. However, he was unlikely to know about her swapping shifts with a friend. So a version arose that he first went to her house, where she lived with other girls. Considering that significantly more bullets were missing from the gun than were found at the murder scene, the officers assumed the worst. It is quite possible that the ominous 6th bullet was fired elsewhere. The police who arrived at Claire's rented apartment found silence and locked doors there. The detective suggested that Michael could have crawled through the window, but they found no signs of a break-in. They hesitated about whether it was worth breaking down the door. Suddenly, law enforcement officers noticed a local resident who was walking around the house with concern. They asked her a few questions, hoping that the girl might have noticed something suspicious. It turned out to be Natalie, a neighbor of the deceased, who could not get into the apartment because she was waiting for her friend with the keys. Of course, she was waiting for Clare Bernall. Upon hearing about the murder, the neighbor was shocked. She immediately suggested that the attacker could only be Michael Pech, and told about his strange behavior on the eve of the incident. Natalie described Michael as a very toxic, manipulative guy who sought total control over Clare. After the girl refused to date him, he began a real persecution. As for Susan, Natalie reported that she could not have become a victim of Michael, because she had been out of town for several days. Although this brought great relief, the mystery of the 6th bullet remained unsolved. The police continued to gather information. They were convinced that the desperate security guard could have killed 2 people before shooting himself. The detectives quickly found Michael's address. He lived half an hour's drive away in a disadvantaged area. It is quite likely that the man could have been associated with crime. It seemed that someone was inside. Although the police arrived uninvited, they decided to interview new witnesses, hoping to find out where Michael got the gun. In the house, law enforcement officers came across 7 men. All of them were immigrants from Eastern Europe and did not speak English. Only one short guy, a Pole named York, knew the language well enough to express himself and understand what the police wanted. He explained that all the residents of this house came on work visas and were engaged in construction projects and trade. Their documents were checked, no connection with crime was found. Michael was their 8th neighbor. Outwardly, he seemed like a nice and very sensitive guy, although secretive. Usually he sat in his room and only rarely communicated with others. This went on until he began to have uncontrolled outbursts of aggression. Of course, after that he moved out. Despite everything, these people were stunned by the murder. They never thought that Michael could be a killer. After talking with the guard's former neighbors, the detectives concluded that he acted alone. At least none of these worker families were involved in the crime. Finally, on Wednesday, September 14th, the 6th bullet was found in the store. It was stuck in the ceiling. The police questioned all of Claire's colleagues to find out more about the perpetrator and the victim. They said that after the breakup, Michael began to behave so inappropriately that they eventually turned to management and asked to remove him. The man was even banned from entering the store building. At first, he lied to everyone that he himself had dumped Claire, and then decided to resume the relationship. But later it became obvious that this was not true. Victoria, who witnessed the massacre, reported that Claire did not even realize what had happened. They glanced at each other before the end of the shift. Suddenly, a dark figure flashed behind Claire. For a moment, Victoria thought that it was a new boyfriend who wanted to surprise the girl, when suddenly a gun appeared in his hands. A shot rang out, and Claire fell to the floor. Victoria saw the attacker lean over her and fire several more times. The horrified witness tried to escape. Behind her back, she heard 2 more shots. When the girl instinctively looked back, there was no one behind the counter anymore. Perhaps it was at that moment that Michael shot himself. Several witnesses immediately described the events in detail, confirming Victoria's words. It became clear why the 6th bullet disappeared. Michael's first shot at his head missed and hit the ceiling. The second shot was already fatal. The guard shot himself in the head and died instantly. Detectives found a new apartment where Michael had recently lived. There they found no indication of where he got the weapon or if he had an accomplice. York handed over to the police 40 pages of notes found in the room of the former neighbor. Michael kept notes in English and Slovak. It became obvious that he had been stalking his ex-girlfriend for a long time. There was even the address of her new apartment, where she moved with her friends. He constantly monitored her every step. Obviously, the stalker really had strong feelings for Claire. He even dedicated poems to her in 2 languages. However, he clearly lived in a world of fantasies, where Claire was his only true love. When Michael found out about her new boyfriend, he realized that it would not be possible to resume the relationship. At that moment, he decided to end it with her and with himself. Claire suffered only 1 wound to the back. The rest of the bullets hit her face. Michael was clearly filled with rage and wanted to destroy her beauty. In the end, she did file a complaint against the stalker, although a little later, because she was already suffering from real paranoia. He was detained, even a psychiatric examination was carried out, but he was found healthy and released without charge. Michael managed to mislead everyone by blaming Claire for everything. He was simply warned that if he continued to communicate with this girl, he would be arrested. Learning about the release of her ex-boyfriend, the heroine decided to move with her friends. What was her surprise and horror when, just a day after the move, while unloading things in the new apartment, Claire saw Michael in the window. He just looked at them and waved his hand in a friendly way. The girl called the police, but by the time they arrived, he had already escaped. Just a day later, everything was repeated. By that time, Clare had learned that Michael had asked one of his colleagues what the most severe punishment for murder in Britain was. She seriously realized the danger to herself and again turned to law enforcement. This time they managed to detain the offender. It seemed that the arrest did not bother him at all. He even raised his handcuffed hands so that the girl could see them in the window. And at the same time, Michael smiled just as affably. He was accused of harassment and death threats, but after 8 days he was released on bail. The man was released until the end of August, when the hearings were supposed to take place. He lay low for a few months, which allowed Clare to calm down a bit. On August 31, 2005, Michael appeared in court. Although at first he denied guilt, at the last moment his lawyer persuaded him to confess to harassment. This made it possible to remove the charge of death threats and reduce the maximum term to 6 months. At the same time, there was a high probability of receiving a suspended sentence and community service. Clare was even glad that she would not have to meet with the stalker in court. He was really sentenced to only a few months of community service. It was concluded that Michael posed a low risk and was not dangerous. After all, he had not pursued Clare for more than 4 months. The heroine calmed down, returned to normal life and did not even want him to be imprisoned again, because she did not want to harm him. But in reality, all this time he was preparing for the massacre and went to his homeland. On June 8, 2005, Michael applied for a firearm and enrolled in target shooting courses. To obtain a pistol, it was necessary to undergo a medical examination, as well as a background check. Michael was not in the databases of the local police, so they did not know about his harassment. Previously, in his homeland, he also was not held liable. The doctor found him healthy. Michael took advantage of these loopholes and on June 14 received a permit for weapons. Immediately after that, the criminal went to the store and legally purchased a pistol, a compact 9mm semi-automatic. On August 11, he transported it by luggage bus from Slovakia to Great Britain. Despite the fact that Michael was under investigation, he managed to slip through unnoticed with the weapon. Now it remained to wait for the hearing on August 31. Until that time, the criminal lay low. It turned out that on Friday, September 16, Clare was scheduled for an interview. Finally, she had a chance to get the coveted position of company administrator. The girl was in a relationship with another young man, but she did not tell him about the stalker so as not to burden him with unnecessary worries. The court's decision was the most striking. Thanks to the plea deal, Michael managed to avoid the maximum punishment, 5 years in prison for death threats. He skillfully pretended to be normal, so he fell into the low-risk category. In the end, all these lucky coincidences and manipulations used allowed him to avoid full retribution for what he had done. During an internal investigation, a whole series of mistakes made by the authorities was revealed, in particular, the absence of Michael's registration in the lists of criminals. Natalie suspected that he posed a much more serious threat than it seemed. Therefore, she turned to the head of security in the cosmetics store. He became interested in the statement and began to carefully view the footage from surveillance cameras. He quickly realized that Michael was really literally following the girl on her heels, harassing her, clinging to her. He mostly did it covertly, observing not directly, but through mirrors. After that, Michael was transferred to another department of the store so that he would not intersect with the object of persecution, but to no avail. He still hung around Clare's workplace. Such behavior seriously affected the girl. She often caught his gaze passing by the mirror. It was oppressive, frightening and led to paranoid moods, up to panic attacks. Thanks to the fact that the head of security turned to the police, Michael was summoned to the management and fired in 2 days, which probably angered him even more. However, the head of security did not stop the investigation there. He interviewed all the store employees. In his opinion, Michael planned to kill Clare back in March, but then he failed to carry out his plan. It was obvious to everyone from the very beginning that this was an unhealthy obsession, except perhaps for Clare herself. The girl was so naive that it cost her her life. The victim's relatives filed a lawsuit accusing the London authorities of negligence. But, as is usually the case, the police officers were acquitted, calling their work proper. Due to the absence of problems with the law, no one believed that Michael was dangerous. In the court's opinion, they could not prevent Clare's death and acted strictly within the framework of the law. Having never received justice, Clare's mother launched her own campaign, enlisting the support of other women who had lost their daughters or suffered from stalkers and the inaction of the authorities. All this provoked the strengthening of legislation and punishment for the persecution of women. Currently, the maximum term of imprisonment under these articles is 10 years. That's all for now. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any future content. Take care and goodbye.